Anthropic just made 200,000 token prompts cost the same as regular ones, and nobody's talking about why this changes everything.
Wait, are you saying those massive context windows don't cost extra anymore? So we're covering the pricing change, what it means for retrieval systems, and how to actually use these massive prompts?
By minute 4, you'll know exactly when to ditch your retrieval pipeline. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the AI Daily Podcast. Today's news and a deep dive to help you stay ahead in AI.
Today we're diving into Anthropic makes a pricing change that matters for Claude's longest prompts.
Stick around to the end for today's headlines. Let's dive right in.
So let's talk about what Anthropic just did with Claude's pricing, because this is actually a much bigger deal than it might seem on the surface. They've completely eliminated their premium pricing tier for long context prompts, which means you can now send a million token prompt to Claude Opus or Sonnet without getting hit with those brutal cost multipliers that used to kick in after 200,000 tokens.
Wait, hold on. For folks who haven't been tracking this closely, can we break down what we're actually talking about here? Because a million tokens sounds like a lot, but what does that actually mean in practice?
Right, so think about it this way. A million tokens is roughly 750,000 words. That's about 15 average-length novels or an entire code base for a mid-size application or hundreds of pages of technical documentation. We're talking about being able to dump your entire knowledge base into a single prompt and ask the AI to reason across all of it simultaneously.
That's massive. But here's what I'm wondering. Why was there premium pricing in the first place? Like, what made long prompts so expensive that they needed a separate pricing tier?
Great question. The computational cost of processing these massive prompts isn't linear. When you're dealing with transformer models like Claude, the attention mechanism, which is how the model understands relationships between different parts of your input, scales quadratically with the length of the prompt. So a prompt that's 5 times longer isn't 5 times more expensive to process. It could be 25 times more expensive.
So if the underlying compute costs haven't changed, how can Anthropic suddenly afford to drop the premium pricing? Are they just eating the cost difference?
That's the fascinating part. There are a few possibilities here. First, they might have made significant efficiency improvements in how they handle long context processing. We've seen companies like Flash Attention and other optimization techniques that can dramatically reduce the computational overhead. Second, and this is where it gets interesting from a business strategy perspective, they might be willing to take a hit on margins to compete more aggressively with OpenAI and Google.
Speaking of competition, where does this put Claude relative to GPT-4 and Gemini? Because I know Google's been pushing hard on the long context front.
You're right to bring that up. Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro actually supports up to 2 million tokens in some configurations, and OpenAI's latest models are pushing into similar territory. But here's the key difference. It's not just about having the capability, it's about making it economically viable for developers to actually use it. What Anthropic is doing here is essentially saying, look, we're not going to penalize you for using the full capabilities of our model.
But doesn't this create a risk? I mean, if everyone starts sending million token prompts because the pricing is flat, couldn't that overwhelm their infrastructure?
Absolutely, and that's one of the big questions here. They must have confidence in their infrastructure scaling, or they've calculated that most users won't actually max out the context window regularly. It's like unlimited data plans. The provider is betting that average usage will stay within profitable bounds, even if some power users push the limits.
This reminds me of what happened with cloud storage pricing a decade ago. Remember when storing a terabyte was prohibitively expensive, and then suddenly everyone was offering near unlimited storage?
Exactly. And that's a perfect analogy because what enabled that shift was a combination of hardware getting cheaper and companies realizing they could monetize in other ways. For AI companies, the real value might not be in charging for compute directly, but in building ecosystem lock-in and enterprise relationships. Coming up, we'll dig into exactly how this pricing change could reshape the way developers build AI applications and why some use cases that were previously impossible are suddenly becoming viable. All right, so let's get into the technical meat of why this pricing change matters so much. When you're building applications with large language models, context window limitations have been one of the biggest constraints on what's actually possible. And it's not just about the size, it's about the economics.
Can you give me a concrete example? Like what kind of application becomes viable now that wasn't before?
Sure, let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're building a code review system for a large enterprise. Previously, if you wanted to analyze an entire pull request in context, including all the related files, the Git history, relevant documentation, and coding standards, you might be looking at 300,000 to 400,000 tokens. Under the old pricing model, once you crossed that 200,000 token threshold, your costs would jump significantly. We're talking about going from maybe $3 per request to $15 or $20 per request.
That adds up fast. If you're doing hundreds of code reviews a day,
Exactly. You could be looking at thousands of dollars per day just in API costs. But now, with flat pricing, that same 400,000 token request costs exactly what you'd expect, just the standard per token rate multiplied by 400,000. No surprises, no premium tiers.
so what are the actual numbers we're talking about here? What's the pricing look like?
For Claude Opus 4.6, we're looking at $15 per million input tokens and $75 per million output tokens. To put that in perspective, analyzing that 400,000 token code review would cost about $6 with Opus or $1.20 with Sonnet for the input side.
But here's what I'm wondering. Is the model actually good at maintaining coherence across such massive contexts? Because it's one thing to accept a million tokens. It's another thing to actually understand relationships between something at token position 50,000 and something at position 950,000.
That's a critical point, and it's where the rubber meets the road. Anthropic has published some impressive benchmarks on what they call needle in a haystack tests, basically hiding specific information deep in a massive context and seeing if the model can find and use it. Their latest models show remarkably consistent performance even at the extreme ends of the context window.
How does that compare to the competition?
From the published benchmarks, Claude's long context performance is competitive with or slightly better than GPT-4 Turbo and Gemini 1.5 Pro. But here's where it gets interesting. Anthropic has been particularly focused on what they call faithful reasoning, meaning the model is less likely to hallucinate or make up information when working with large contexts. For enterprise applications, that reliability might be worth more than raw performance.
That makes sense. I'm thinking about use cases like contract analysis or regulatory compliance, where you absolutely cannot have the model inventing clauses or regulations that don't exist.
Precisely. And this is where Anthropic's safety-first approach might actually be a competitive advantage. They've spent enormous effort on making their models more reliable and truthful, which becomes even more important when you're asking the model to reason over massive amounts of information.
But let's talk about the operational challenges. If I'm running infrastructure and suddenly my users start sending million token prompts, what should I be worried about?
Great question. First, latency is going to be your biggest concern. Processing a million token prompt takes time. We're talking potentially 30 to 60 seconds for the initial processing, depending on the complexity. That's before you even start generating the response. You need to architect your systems to handle these long-running requests gracefully.
So we're talking about implementing proper queuing systems, maybe WebSockets for real-time updates, definitely some kind of progress indication for users.
Exactly. And don't forget about memory management. These large contexts consume significant GPU memory, which means you might need to rethink how you batch requests or manage concurrent users. Some teams are implementing clever caching strategies where they pre-process common document sets and reuse the computed embeddings.
What about rate limits? Are there any gotchas there?
Anthropic has separate rate limits for requests per minute and tokens per minute. With million token prompts, you'll hit your token per minute limit way before your request limit. They currently allow 4,000 requests per minute on the standard tier and only 400,000 tokens per minute on the standard tier. So you'd max out at less than 1 million token requests per minute unless you're on an enterprise plan. Stick around. In our final segment, we'll give you the exact framework for deciding when to use long context models and how to optimize your costs while taking advantage of this new pricing structure. All right, let's get practical here. How should engineering teams actually think about leveraging this pricing change? Because it's not just about cramming as much context as possible into every request.
Right, because even though the pricing is now linear, sending a million tokens still costs real money. What's the decision framework here?
I like to think about it in terms of value per token. Ask yourself, does having all this information in a single context actually improve the quality of the output enough to justify the cost? For something like analyzing a legal contract where every clause might reference other clauses, absolutely. For basic question answering where the relevant information is localized, probably not.
So it's about identifying use cases where cross-reference and holistic understanding really matter.
Exactly. Here's my framework. First, calculate your baseline cost with traditional RAG or chunking approaches. Include the engineering time to build and maintain that infrastructure. Then compare that to the simple approach of just dumping everything into a long context. Often the simplicity wins, especially for proof of concepts or lower volume applications.
That's a good point about engineering time. I've seen teams spend months building sophisticated retrieval systems when they could have just used a long context model.
And here's another key insight. You can use different strategies for different parts of your application. Maybe you use Sonnet 4.6 with long contexts for your development and testing workflows where cost efficiency matters, but then use more targeted, smaller prompts with Opus 4.6 for production, customer-facing features where you need the absolute best performance.
What about caching strategies? With these large contexts, that becomes even more important, right?
Absolutely crucial. If you're repeatedly analyzing the same large document set, say your company's knowledge base, or a standard set of regulations, you should be implementing aggressive caching. Some teams are even pre-computing embeddings for common document combinations and storing those results.
But doesn't that introduce cache invalidation challenges if one document in your million token context changes?
You're right, and that's where you need to be smart about cache key generation. Instead of caching entire prompts, consider caching at the semantic level. Cache the analysis results for specific document combinations, and then compose those results. It's more complex, but can save enormous amounts on API costs.
What about the competitive landscape? How do you see this playing out over the next year?
I think we're going to see a race to the bottom on long context pricing. This move from Anthropic puts pressure on OpenAI and Google to match or beat their pricing. We might see context windows expanding to 10 million tokens or more, and pricing continuing to drop. The real differentiation will come from reliability and specialized capabilities.
So where should teams focus their efforts right now?
3 things. First, audit your existing AI workflows and identify where you're working around context limitations. Those are your immediate opportunities. Second, start experimenting with long context patterns now while the field is still evolving. You want to build that muscle memory. And third, invest in robust monitoring and cost tracking infrastructure because these large prompts can add up quickly if you're not careful.
Any specific gotchas people should watch out for?
The biggest one is assuming that more context always equals better results. There's a phenomenon where models can actually get confused with too much irrelevant information. You still need to be thoughtful about what you include. Also, watch out for timeout issues. Make sure your infrastructure can handle requests that might take a minute or more to process.
Looking forward, what do you think this means for the AI industry more broadly?
I think we're seeing the maturation of LLMs from research curiosities to actual business tools. When companies start competing on price and removing artificial barriers, that's a sign the technology is ready for mainstream adoption. We're moving from can we do this to how can we do this cost effectively.
It reminds me of the early days of cloud computing when AWS started aggressively cutting prices.
That's a perfect comparison. And just like with cloud computing, the companies that figure out how to leverage these capabilities effectively will have a massive competitive advantage. The key is to start experimenting now, build up your team's expertise, and be ready to scale when it makes sense.
So the takeaway is, this isn't just a pricing change, it's an enabler for entirely new classes of applications.
Exactly. When you remove economic barriers to using powerful technology, innovation follows. I expect we'll see some genuinely novel applications emerging over the next few months that simply weren't viable before. The teams that move quickly and thoughtfully will be the ones that capture that value. Before we wrap up, let's catch up on this week's infrastructure news. There's a deeply troubling legal development involving Elon Musk's XAI. According to TechCrunch, the company is facing a lawsuit from minors who allege that Grok generated abusive sexual images of them.
That's incredibly serious. What are the specific allegations?
The plaintiffs claim XAI failed to implement basic safeguards that could have prevented this. It raises fundamental questions about AI safety and content moderation in generative models.
This could set a major precedent for AI liability. Moving to another legal battle, Encyclopedia Britannica is taking on OpenAI.
Yes, The Verge reports that Britannica and Merriam-Webster are suing OpenAI, claiming GPT-4 was trained on their copyrighted content without permission. They say the model can essentially memorize their entries.
So they're arguing it memorized their content?
Exactly. This gets at the heart of the ongoing debate about AI training data and fair use. Speaking of models, NVIDIA just released something interesting on Hugging Face.
The Nemetron 3 Nano 4B GGUF. It's a compact language model designed for both reasoning and non-reasoning tasks.
What makes it special?
It's optimized for efficiency, only 4 billion parameters, but punches above its weight class, perfect for edge deployment scenarios.
Now here's something that could shake up the entire software industry. AI News reports that OpenAI's Frontier platform is positioning AI agents as a direct challenge to traditional SaaS.
How so?
Instead of per-seat licensing, Frontier offers a centralized AI agent orchestration layer. Companies could potentially replace multiple SaaS tools with customized AI agents.
That's an existential threat to the SaaS business model. Finally, there's fascinating research from Archive on medical AI reasoning.
The Shatter Med QA benchmark addresses a critical problem: LLMs taking shortcuts in medical reasoning rather than following proper diagnostic chains.
By pruning generic knowledge graph hubs, they're forcing models to actually reason through medical problems step by step. That's crucial for healthcare applications.
That wraps up today's news. That's our show for today.
If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share with a friend who'd appreciate it.
Drop us a comment with your thoughts on today's topic.
Links to everything we discussed are in the show notes.
Until next time.